In this segment, I will cover creating and configuring AVDs. I will also discuss some strategies for using these emulators to support testing of your app. One of the most useful features of the Android SDK is the ability to create AVDs, or Android virtual devices, that allow you to emulate a wide range of devices. As you write your app, you will likely create code that runs only on certain API levels. In some cases, this is because you've directly written code to check the API level. For example, if we look in our app, there's an if statement that checks to see if the build version is greater than or equal to Gingerbread, which is API level 9. So based on this, we can tell that we should definitely test with a device that's at least API level 9 and something that is an older API level, because this particular line of code will be skipped on older devices, and whatever that code happens to do in your app will behave differently on the different devices. Another case where that happens is when you're using, for example, the Android support libraries. All of this code embedded inside this code are the same kind of decisions based on the API level. So these menus, I'm using the compatibility menus from the support library, and these will look different on different API levels. So I definitely need to test with an older device and a newer device to make sure that that everything is displayed and rendered the way I expect it to be. So as you're doing your work, be sure to keep track of these important boundaries so you can test them later. If you don't have devices to represent every API level, the AVDs are a great way to augment your testing resources. So let's create an AVD to facilitate testing a camera-based app on the latest version of Android, which at the time of this recording is API level 16 or Android 4.1. Inside of IntelliJ IDEA, let's go to the Tools menu, and the Android option has the AVD Manager. The Android Virtual Device Manager is essentially the control panel for all of your emulated Android devices. So to create one, we'll click the New button. We give it a meaningful name. In this case, I'm going to the first one I'm going to make is the earliest one I plan to support. The earliest version is Android 2.1. So I'll pick that. API level 7, Android 2.1. ARM is the only supported CPU for that version. 512 megs of RAM is fine for what I'm doing. Actually, a lot of devices back then only had 256, so maybe that's better. I'm going to turn on the snapshotting. This is a really convenient feature. It will save you from having to wait for the emulator to boot every time you use this emulator. So if for older systems, it's pretty much you just always want it. And I'm going to pick the HVGA resolution. It was pretty common on Android 2.1 devices. I'm also going to use it on our more modern emulator because it'll fit nicely within the video. But a lot of newer devices are using much higher resolutions. I'm going to set up a camera so we can actually test cameras. There's two kinds of cameras to be interested in here. There's the emulated mode, which means the emulator is going to generate an image, a test image. And the other setting is the webcam setting, which means it will take the video from the webcam in your computer and it will actually show it inside the emulator. So I'm going to save it like that, push enter so it'll actually remember the setting I picked, and create. Okay. So that's there. We can use the start. Whenever you make a change to an emulator, be sure to restart it after changing the configuration. So if we go into the edit screen and we change something, the next thing you should do is go, if it uses snapshots, you should go and uncheck the launch from snapshot and launch it, and that will actually start it from scratch. So while that guy's booting up, let's go ahead and close that, and we'll create the other emulator we need, which is a one running on the latest release, which is currently API 16, and I'm going to pick ARM. I should also test it with the Intel, and actually I don't have it on this system, but there's also MIPS images available now too. The behavior should be identical across all platforms, but it's good to test just to be sure. These devices typically have plenty of memory. I'm only going to give it 512, but many devices actually have a lot more than that. Again, I'm going to pick the HVGA to give us a small screen that'll fit inside our video here. And devices newer than Android 2.3 and higher support multiple cameras. So let's go ahead and configure both the back and the front facing cameras. The best way to do this is to assign the two cameras to something different. So which one do we have here? The front facing camera I'm going to assign to my webcam, and press enter to make sure it remembers that, and the back facing camera will be the emulated camera. Okay, the settings all look good. We'll create that one also. And confirmation that we have the two different settings for the webcams. And the reason for doing that is so you can actually tell the difference. If they're set to the same thing, when you're testing the logic to switch between front and back facing cameras, it will be hard to tell that it's working. One other thing to point out, with I believe it was Android 4.0 and API level 16 and higher, there is a new feature that's always enabled, and that's the GPU acceleration. In a hardware device, this is always enabled. In our emulator, you have to decide between enabling this and taking advantage of the snapshot feature. For most of your time when you're developing, the snapshot feature is going to save you enough time that it will be worth using it and not using the GPU acceleration until you get toward the end. And then you probably want to test with the GPU acceleration. Just set it to yes and uncheck that. But you'll want to test with that just to make sure that it doesn't change the behavior of the app. This is definitely something you want to test with. But for the most of your development time, you're going to want to be able to save the time and just use the snapshots. Okay, and once you've created your devices, I'm going to let that go into the background. In your run configurations, we will select our launch target here. You can pick if you want it just to ask you every time you hit run, or you can assign it to always go to an attached USB device. So if you have an actual piece of hardware that you're doing your testing on, you can use that. Or you can set it to one of your emulated devices. And my Android manifest must be prohibiting the Android 2.1 device from working with this app. So I need to go back and edit that. And the reason I don't use the chooser is it saves some clicks. And usually if I'm using one, I'll use it several times in a row, so it's just a lot easier to have it default to one, and then I'll come in here and edit this when I want to use, for example, a piece of hardware or a different AVD. Once that's selected, all I have to do is press the run or the debug button. Either one will work to launch the app. If you hit debug, the debugger will automatically attach, and you can set breakpoints and observe them in the app. So just run it and see what happens.